It's all for you. Yeah, yo. There whenever it matters, and even more when you feel like it doesn't. Protect you so you never feel like you wasn't. Know I'm right alongside you. Either that or I'm behind you, but always got you. End of discussion, nothing means more. First one to offer is shoulders for what you reach for. Thought I saw the eyes of the world until I seen yours. And know that I ain't see a better view yet. I'm with whatever, so don't ever you fret. Know that you covered, not a hurdle or a heartbreak. A change what a partake, cause none of them won't ever get comfortable in your walkway. My job is to aware you, fully loaded, prepare you for all of the above that I'm never letting get near you. But still in all, give you every advantage I found. Couldn't find a better fit for them, along with my crown. And since the baton was passed, I've been down. Cause failing's not an option, and dad is not a noun, not at all.
1, 2. Hey everyone, welcome to Dad is Not a Noun. My name is Ishmael. I hope everyone's doing all right today. I got my co-host for today, good brother Greg Burnham. He is the co-author of a novel called Tuskegee Heirs. What's up, brother? How you doing, man?
Hey, how's it going?
What's going on, man? And then I have the amazing artist, the entrepreneur, the man of many talents, Damar Douglas. Damar, what's up, brother?
Yo, what's happening? What's happening? How everybody doing?
He's kind of focused right now because he's working on this illustration because we're trying something a little bit different, something a little bit new here at Dad is Not a Noun. And especially with the new animated series coming out on Netflix, which is out now, called Yasuke. And I'm excited to have this guest on because he took diligent work to create this book on this historical story on the legend, the myth, Yasuke. I have the author Thomas Lockley. He has a book called African Samurai. How you doing, Mr. Lockley? How you doing, sir? How you doing?
Good evening, good morning, wherever we are in the world. Hi, thank you for having me on.
No, thank you. So how are you doing? I know COVID stopped the world and everything like that. So how's everything been in your part of the world in Japan with COVID?
That's a good question. Japan's coped relatively well with COVID, but the economy is not good, and I think everybody's just tired right now, and me included. Yeah, the world is different. The world is much different.
Definitely. And then, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I work for a university called Nihon University, with the biggest university in Japan. I teach a mixture of courses in English, history, education. My prime specialism is in education, teaching, and with the ways to teaching methods, basically. So that's what I do. As we're on a father-orientated website, I'm also a father of 2 and a husband to 1. And my daughter is 10. I hope that's right. Yeah. And my son is 8. And one of the reasons I really wanted to say yes to this is because I think what you're doing is great. We need more fathers involved in lives, whether they be African-American or Japanese or English or whatever. We need fathers to be more involved in their children's lives in general.
And I think that's important too, being involved in your child's life, but that's also the importance of history. So what made you so interested in history?
Probably my grandfather, actually. Maybe we should have grandfather as not a noun. My grandfather was telling me historical stories from when I was young. He was a teacher as well, and he taught classics, which is not something which we teach anymore. Latin, Greek, Latin stories, and all that kind of. Nobody learns that kind of stuff now, but 70 years ago they did, and he's teaching me, telling me stories from when I was a baby, and I guess that's probably where it came from. It's a good question.
No, and I think that's a point because that pulls me into that world, Yasuke. What intrigued you about Yasuke?
Well, Yasuke I met by mistake on the internet about 12 years ago, and it's a story you couldn't make up. It's just it's just such an amazing story. It's got all the makings of the best movie you ever saw, but it's true. And Ishmael, you said at the beginning, a legend, a story. It's not a story. It's not a legend. He lived. He existed. This is a man who was alive 400 years ago, and 440 years ago, and that's the awesome, amazing thing about this story, is that it is real. Okay, in the book, we have to build a few bridges around, build it up a little bit to just work out the world he lived in. But that was all taken from sources. That was all taken from real sources, other people reading and writing about the time. And, that's the world he would have lived in. That's the world he would have seen. He didn't write that down, but other people did. And we know that he was walking through those streets. We know he was in that castle. We know he was seeing those views. And therefore, I think we can say that it's as near to the truth about his life as we can get.
And doing that research, tell me some of the challenges you face with your research for the book.
Time. As a father, it's difficult to find time to do other things, but it's important. It started off as a hobby, basically, and then it turned into something more as it became clear that there was much more of a story than I ever could have imagined. It was, the other thing is things like money. To go and travel to these places costs money, takes time to buy books, to investigate, etc. as well. Besides that, it was, there aren't that many sources about Africa at that time, and there aren't that many sources about India at that time that are easy to get hold of. And that kind of thing was a bit challenging as well. There's loads of stuff on Japan at that time. There's loads of stuff on Europe at that time, and China, etc. But to find the African sources was pretty challenging.
And then also, what makes your book different from other people's account of Yasuke?
I don't think anybody else has ever written another account of it. There are various fictions written about Yasuke or books with him as a character. There's a French guy whose name I've forgotten, I apologize, who wrote a book, but I'm pretty sure that it was fictionalized. There's been all sorts of anime and manga with him as well, but again, they're all fictionalized. So I think what makes mine different is that it's fact, as far as we can know the fact.
True that. And then also, have you faced any kind of negativity on yourself writing this story? Because you know how we live in this tribal society. Like, if you're a white person, you can't tell a black person's story, and vice versa. So have you faced any kind of negativity or pushback from this book?
Not that I know of. Quite the opposite. Everybody wants to know Yasuke. Japan has embraced him. The US, where you guys are, seems to have embraced him. He'll be in Time magazine this week. He's on Netflix, as you know. Europe, he has been fairly popular, not quite to the extent of Japan and the US yet, but I've had people from all over the world, Africa, South America, Brazil in particular, asking questions about him. The only place so far I've not had any questions about is from Antarctica. So that's all the continents.
Greg, you have a question, brother?
I mean, I have a million questions, but I'm going to try to. I know we're not going to be on here for 2 days. So first off, I just want to thank you, for doing this, because as someone who's in love with history, and I'm trying. We try to bring these certain content into the light. I just applaud you for taking that step and saying, I'm going to write this book. And I think it's probably the catalyst for all these things that we're seeing now.
I'm not allowed to talk about that.
Right. But we're going to give you those flowers.
So, yeah, I'm just zipping up there. We edit that out.
Yeah.
So, as far as like something I'm curious about, what did your the college that you work for, did they help you to fund this, or did you funded all of it yourself, like all the research?
That's a good question. I have research funds at the university, of course, and some of that I used to buy books. Some of the books I bought myself. Some trips were paid for by the book. So you get an advance for writing a book, and that paid for some of the trips that we did to investigate. So the book's paying for itself, if you like. And other things, I went on a conference down to Osaka and went to the conference, of course, with university funds, but then went to Kyoto and paced out the battlefields afterwards and stuff like that. So it's a mixture of personal, the book itself, and of course, university is always generous with books and things like that. So I'm blessed, basically. I've been blessed, and I hope to pass that on to Yasuke.
Nice. And then I wanted to, I don't want to go, like, my idea is hopefully people see this and then they go purchase the book if they haven't already. But I did want to ask, like, about perception. How was he perceived? I know that they said, that he was kind of like a rock star, but were there people, because how do I say it? So, like, racism is a weird thing, and we see all these instances in the world where, like, people weren't racist; they were just, judging people on a one-to-one basis, and then this big cloud came over. So, was there any racist views towards him, or was he, they just looked at him like this amazing figure?
Well, let's go for the sources first. The sources which we have, the first time he appears in any sources in the Jesuit source, and it's basically the crowd's mobbing him because they can't get enough of him. All right, it's because he's different. He looks different, and there you go. The second source we have, it's the next mob is a different mob. So I think you can say that he was fairly well received. And of course, then the next source after that, we have he's meeting Nobunaga, his lord, and he's being invited to a party, and he's being given money and all of that kind of thing. I think in Yasuke's case, we need to look at him as an individual from the factual perspective. From the non-factual perspective, we can look at other aspects. Gods in Japan at the time, and to a certain extent today, are often black-skinned.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fact. Therefore, you got this black-skinned guy that you never seen anybody with black skin before. A black-skinned guy is coming into your life, and the only other thing with black skin you've seen before is a god or a devil or a deity of some kind. What are you going to think? This is not an age when we have the internet, or television, and all these kind of things. And normal people, common people, would never even have seen artwork. That their life would have been confined to their city square, their sphere, their farm, their village, and then suddenly this virtual deity guy who looks like a god comes in. So you got to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah.
Racism, that's the second question, or the second part of the question, was very, very different in those days from how it is today. People did not conceive of race in the same way. It was more religious based. And I'm not saying there isn't religious based prejudice today, because of course there is, but people like Valiano, people like the Jesuits did not necessarily, they did judge on race. Excuse me, they did judge on race. Let's not get that wrong. But they were more concerned whether somebody was Catholic or not. And that was far, far more important to them than to what somebody looked like. Valiana himself wrote, or is believed to have written, certain gradations of race and the races of the world. And in that, noticeably, he judges the Africans to be not very, he doesn't judge them very positively. But at the same time, he judges the Chinese and the Japanese to be higher than Europeans in this. So the concepts of what people thought, and this is a very difficult thing to put into words. It was just a different world, and we have to look at it. We have to try and look at it from a different world and try and get inside their skins. And I don't think anybody really can, because that's 400 years ago, and the skins 400 years ago that people wore were so different from that. These are people that no, I'm not going to go there. We could talk about this all day.
No, I love it, and that's the purpose of this podcast, is to change the narrative and get people engaged to have conversations like that. But Greg took my question, because that's the one thing that what I found fascinating about this book is how religion plays a key character in the book, subtle and non-subtle in that book. And so that's how I think, Mr. Lockley, you were talking about earlier about how it wasn't more about race, it was the influence of religion that played a critical role in people engaging with each other. But can you kind of talk about who were the Jesuits? Because I find them intriguing too. Can you talk about them a little bit?
In the 16th century, there was a schism, a break in Western European Christianity. Martin Luther, Calvin invented a new way of relating to God, a more direct way. The priest was no longer needed. The Catholic Church was no longer needed. They didn't need to sell talismans or blessings. God would give those for free if you engaged with God. All right? That's where the Jesuits come in, because they believed that you still needed that. You need the priest to intervene between you and God. They were formed, I think, you got me here, 1540-ish by Loyola, and very quickly they were sending missionaries around Europe, and then very soon as far away as Japan. Within 10 years, Francis Xavier has reached Japan as a Jesuit. He's one of the founding members. They believed that the protection of the Catholic Church was worth anything, essentially. They would sell slaves, children, Japanese children were sold to fund their mission. Their souls would be saved if they were in a Christian household, whether they be slaves or free. The money from selling them would fund other people's conversion to the one true God, blah, blah, etc. They would sell guns, they would do all of this. Yet at the same time, they saw themselves as very pure. They saw themselves as doing God's work, and anything they did to reach God's work was worth it. Again, looking back 400 years later, it sounds horrific, but they believed, and if you read what they wrote, they knew they were doing the right thing. There was no question, there was no doubt in their minds. They were saving souls, essentially. And I'm originally from the UK, England, and the Jesuits really believed that Japan was replacing England in heaven. The souls that they would convert in Japan were to replace the souls which the Catholic Church had lost when England broke from the Catholic Church. So you've got a very nuanced. It's a difficult question. I'll leave it there again.
Wait, no, that's fine.
That's who the Jesuits were, and ironically, because they do anything to convert people, they ended up being expelled from virtually everywhere in the world. England was one of the first to expel them in, I think, the 1580s, 1590s. Japan was pretty quick after that. Ethiopia was 1630. other areas of the world, Thailand, 1680. They were too interfering, basically.
But it's kind of interesting too, because like later in Yasuke's life, the Jesuit saw him as an important figure.
Yeah. And from a Jesuit perspective, you couldn't get better than Yasuke. For public relations, you can't get more attention called to you than crowds mobbing you. All right. And they don't write it specifically because it would have been unpolitical to do so, but they would have fed off his popularity. To get crowds watching you is one thing, to get crowds mobbing you is a different thing, and they would have used Yasuke to that end. There is a theory, and to a certain extent I also agree with it, that him being with Nobunaga would have acted to a certain extent as a spy for the Jesuits as well. I mean, not that he would have necessarily been put there on purpose, but having that information, a guy with the biggest lord in the country would have been handy for them too. So yes, of course they would have fed off him. Yeah.
But also talk about, because a lot of people don't know him in the States, but talk about Nobunaga. Who was Nobunaga?
Nobunaga is probably the most infamous guy in Japanese history. He was a unique man. He would kill at just like that, click of a finger. He was also loved by his people for increasing economic benefits, forcing peace, basically. What we'd call, he'd kill everybody so that everybody could be at peace, basically. All right, if you've got nobody left alive, then there's peace, basically. He was the kind of hammer kind of ruler. Japan had been at war for 100 years, essentially, a civil war lasting 100 years. And if you can think about the First World War 100 years ago to now, today, war the whole time, everywhere, then you can get a concept of how they wanted peace. Right? Farmers didn't care who was killed. They just wanted to be able to farm in peace. And Nobunaga was the man who studied that process. And he would have killed tens and tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people to enforce that peace. But by the time he was assassinated, he had probably taken around about half of the country and enforced his peace on that. And two successors came after him and completed his life's work of reunifying and enforcing a peace on the country.
So he's basically like a real life Thanos.
Poor Thanos.
Yeah. That's how I'm going to describe him to my son next time. My son. Okay, so Nobunaga and Thanos. Right, you got it. Yeah, he was. Yeah, and he also believed he was a god as well. He built himself a temple. The castle where Yasuke lived was almost a temple to himself. Sorry, Greg.
Oh no, that's good information. And since we are like nerds and we're into comic books and all this kind of stuff, for all of like our fans that are fans of animation and all that, how, like, as a warrior, like where would Yasuke be put? Because I've seen things like to say, like, what I guess best way to ask this, was he like an honorary samurai, or was he a real samurai?
That is a great question, and again, we have no serious answer to that. But the concept of samurai is almost a modern concept anyway. So essentially, the word samurai probably would not even have been used in those days to mean what it means now. It existed, of course, the word existed. So actually, more accurately would be to call him a warrior. Yeah, he was a warrior. He was a warrior in Japan, therefore he was a Japanese warrior. Did he have all the skills that we now associate with samurai, all the martial arts and all that? No, almost definitely not. But could he use a sword? Yeah. Could he use a spear? Almost definitely. Could he cut somebody's throat with a knife? Yeah, I'd put a lot of money on the fact that he could do that. And therefore, that's not so different from the other warriors who are around him. And some of the few sources we have depict him sumo wrestling, for example. That was a warrior's martial art, a skill. So we do know that he did engage with Japanese martial arts to some extent, but we don't know how much. And anyway, does it matter? This is a guy who traveled the world, not that he wanted to, but he was taken around the world as a bodyguard, as a warrior. And he went from one culture or several cultures, through several cultures, and ended up at the top of a different culture. Now that, even if taking out the weapons and the warrior and the romance and everything, is an amazing thing to be able to do.
And that was going to be my thing. It really doesn't matter because it's such an amazing, I want to call it a tale. That's
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's very inspirational. And one of the things that I'm a big fan of is bringing these type of things to light, because what you're doing in this instance is you're showing people, all these capabilities that no matter how many times people say you can't do this or you can't be this, and we can say, well, yeah, 400 years ago this happened, And so again, I just want to applaud you for your efforts.
Thank you.
No,
we say 440 years ago it happened. Yeah, sure. But there are many other instances of similar things happening later on in history as well. It doesn't have to be unique. And they happened before that too. These things are not unique. They're just not necessarily recorded, or they're not necessarily talked about. And I think what I'd like to do is, and what you are helping me do, or you're helping us all do, is understand that actually there's a bit of Yasuke in everybody. If you can only find Yasuke in everybody.
And you Gray, you gotta be calling him Thanos now. So with Thanos, how was the first introduction with the first time they met each other? Can you talk about that?
With Nobunaga, right?
Yes, sir.
I don't think you ever met Thanos. But, okay. Well, there's, as I said, there's a riot. We don't know how many thousands of people were in the crowd, but we do know that similar crowds attracted up to 10,000 people, similar riots at the time. So we can say that there was thousands. People were trampled to death. People were pushing at the Jesuit church, the mission building, and it was about to fall down. Everybody was scared. But 5 minutes walk away is Nobunaga's residence in Kyoto, the city where they were, and he demands to find out what's going on. Why is this? What's happening? Who's disturbing my peace? And he sends his soldiers to break up the riot and bring whoever is responsible to Nobunaga. Yasuke was brought before Nobunaga, probably thinking he was about to die, and Nobunaga is curious. I mean, he's a curious guy. This is a revolutionary in so many ways, and he is not recorded, but he basically says, "I don't believe you're you. How can you have black skin?" So he gets a brush and a bucket, and he asks him to strip. Yasuke to strip. Brushes the skin. Of course, nothing happens, and Nobunaga goes, "Whoa, you're real." And then he calls his sons in, throws a party for Yasuke, and at the end, he gifts Yasuke a lot of money. Yasuke is a rich man by the end of that day. And although we're not quite sure when exactly it happened, sometime in the next few days, Yasuke then enters his service. Probably at the beginning, more as a kind of fad, more as, oh, this guy's going to make me look good. Later on, we know that actually Yasuke became a lot more than that. They talked extensively to the extent that Nobunaga couldn't stop talking to him. That's recorded. Of course, Yasuke was given swords, residents, servants, and we presume money to go with them. Of course, you got to pay for that. And then he was recorded twice as accompanying Nobunaga on campaign in battles. Although until the assassination, he wasn't in the front line. He wasn't fighting in the battle because he was with Nobunaga. Nobunaga was the general, so he was slightly further back.
Would you say he was more like, I won't say it, but kind of like, I won't say second in charge, but he was like his right-hand man because he kind of trusted him more?
No. He wasn't. No, he was more. Nobunaga had a group of around 30 young men around him. The normal translation into English for those guys is page boys. Essentially, more like mentees. Nobunaga was the mentor. These were the guys who was bringing up. This is common in Japanese history. You have a very small group of young men around you. They grow older. They get other young men around them. It's kind of education. Yasuke joined that group. We don't know exactly what rank he would have had, but again, that's not necessarily that important. His proximity to power that counts, right? And he was there where the power was. So he wouldn't have been in command at all. It wouldn't have been a command position. It would have been a learning position. It would have been an accompanying position, a guy to talk to, a guy to throw things around, ideas. How do they do this in India? How do they do this? Well, he might have said Africa, but Yasuke would have been too young when he left Africa to know what happened in Africa, probably. So.
And then also, can you touch on the misconception that Yasuke was a former slave? Because I know that's been like a debate whether if he was or wasn't.
Yeah, there's little doubt that at some point in his life, Yasuke would have been enslaved. I mean, I think we can say that with a 99% surety. We don't know his backstory as such, but we know that at the time, the vast majority of Africans outside Africa, vast majority, had been enslaved at some point. In those days, slavery was not inherited. It was not something that was you inherited from your parents or anything like that. It was simply a state. Most slaves were freed at some point during their life. And often, from a military perspective, many soldiers had been slaves and bought to be soldiers, trained up, and then essentially freed to be soldiers. And Yasuke was probably that kind of a guy. He would have been taken at an early age from his parents, probably violently. Almost definitely they would have been killed. He would have been trafficked across the sea to India, or possibly to a different part of Africa. And some point he would have either gained his freedom or become so wealthy as a slave that it didn't really matter anymore. And that happened too. People think of, from a modern day perspective, people think of slaves as being badly dressed, just dressed in rags, not having any money, not being paid. That wasn't necessarily the case in those days. You could be enslaved but rich at the same time. If you were, again, it's proximity to power. He was the servant, whether he was enslaved or not. He was the servant to one of the most important Jesuits in the world, probably number 3 in the world. He would have been far more important than even all the other common people around him. As a level of status. Again, it's something we find difficult to conceive of these days. But by the time he got to Japan, I personally, having weighed up all the evidence, by the time he got to Japan, I would say that he would have been given his freedom manumitted, possibly 10 years before. I mean, we're not quite sure exactly how old he was, but when he arrived in Japan, he would have been around about 22, 23 perhaps. So,
and before we end this great conversation, the one thing I got from the book personally was Yasuke is a great warrior, but he also showed a level of empathy because he's seen the world and he's seen pain, he's seen trauma. He was a part of trauma. That's what I got from the book. But what do you want people to get from reading the book? But that's what I got from it personally, from reading the book.
I think, as we said before the interview started, that's something that nobody's actually mentioned to me before. all the 100 times I've talked about Yasuke, nobody's put it in that way. And I suspect that that's, again, everybody can relate to Yasuke in their own way. He is a factual human being. He lived. He did what he did. We know that. But also, we can also relate to him in our own way, from our own perspective. And of course, as the writer or the co-author of the book with Jeffrey Gerard, we would also have put a little bit of us into him as well. So, and you as the reader will put a bit of you into him as well. You'll see the aspects of him that you wanted to see and that appealed to you. And I think that's one of the things about Yasuke's character, is that we can all relate to him in our own way.
Definitely. Greg, you have a last question? Damar, I know you're focused. Do you have a question? Or you just focus on the illustration?
No, this is amazing. No, that's amazing information. I wasn't aware of, like, to this extent. So I'm like blown away right now.
My job.
That's another reaction to Yasuke. Blown away. There you go.
Greg,
Thomas, I just was going to ask, do you have any other projects coming up, or?
Thank you for asking. Yes and no. I've got a few projects in Japan, which are probably irrelevant to you guys, and they're mainly education focused, because that's my day job. I'm a teacher. If in a more international sphere, on YouTube right now, with a channel called Voices of the Past. It's a history-focused channel. I've got a few documentaries which have been coming out over the last few months, and yeah, they're not about Yasuke, but they're related to that period in Japanese history and in Japanese history. And if you like the book, I think you'll like those too. They're from a different perspective than the normal bland perspective that often is given to history. Let's make it fun. It is fun. History is fun. Let's enjoy history for what it is, rather than turn it into a dull list of dates or whatever.
Good stuff, man.
Mr. Lockley, thank you for your time. We appreciate you. I appreciate your patience. You have the patience of a saint. But
right.
How can people find you? Are you on social media? How can people find you before we end?
On Facebook, Thomas Lockley author. Please, as Ishmael, that's how you found me. Please reach out if you want to. Things that are happening with Yasuke are always posted up there. There's a documentary out in Japan next month, for example. It's the first full-length documentary about his life. Might be on NHK World at some point, so you guys might be able to see it as well. But for the moment, it's just on NHK, which is the Japanese national broadcaster. So that's big. And things like that you can find out about on Facebook, Thomas Lockley author. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you guys for being a part of this. A great conversation. After you've seen the animation, go buy this man's book, because it's worth.
No, just buy the book.
Buy the book.
You can do two things at once.
Yes,
That's
yes.
that's what I like.
Yeah, we are a multi-task society. I agree.
Like you might not even. Well, I'm not gonna say anything, but yeah, buy the book. Also, Damar, like, are you gonna share this image with the world when you finish it, or?
We can put this up on Facebook on the Yasuke page on Facebook.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah,
Cool beans.
Mr.
Yeah,
Lockley
absolutely.
he's gonna get it first before anybody else. We're just gonna let people know that he's gonna get it first.
As soon as I get it,
Oh, yeah,
the world's going to get it. So I hope that's okay. It'll be on Facebook straight away.
Yeah, for sure.
That's right. But yeah,
Yeah.
Mr. Lockley, thank you for your time. Thank you, and we're out of here. Peace.
Good luck. Take care. Bye.